our friends. We want to be able to be in our own school, and also we want to have, what's the word? We want to have our prom in DC. We don't know how this can affect that, and a lot of us is worried about that.
Well, I don't think the prom in DC, the 8th grade dance in DC, I don't think those things would change as much. They just, the dance obviously wouldn't be in the school if we can't open. I don't know why DC wouldn't happen. I mean, we get on a bus from a different place and go. Yeah. You know, to answer your question, I put myself in your shoes and even in the teacher's shoes, and I know how stressful it is to move from one house to another. Imagine moving what you do for 6.5 hours of the day somewhere else with everything that, you know, for now has been basically locked up in the room, so they haven't even been able to get at it. If we can bring the levels down below the EPA guidelines, my recommendation to the school committee is most probably going to be, let's have it here and work on the long-term solution. So if these things that we're trying to do work, my hope is that you can have 8th grade in the middle school.
And also, with my problem with moving is, I know we'll have the same teachers, but that's going to put a lot of stress on kids. Say they don't have the best grades already and are trying to keep them up at where they are. Their grades might just drop because they can't take it because it's so new to them.
That's why I would like to be able to hopefully get this to work. It's stress all over. I mean, I know the teachers that have already talked to me are stressed, even the high school teachers, because they think we may have to affect the high school. They're stressed. So my whole staff is like way up here. And I understand the students are going to be all worried because in 4 or 5 weeks, you're going to be going, I'm not sure where I'm going. We will let people know. Again, I would feel uncomfortable if we didn't have a good plan to open, to still go there no matter what. But if we can bring the levels down, we'll certainly listen.
Also, with the cafeteria, you said you didn't test it, but what if it is in the cafeteria? That's where we eat our food. Is there any way that we could have ingested it and made it worse, or like that?
I'm sure that if it's in the air, if it's in the dust, you know, there's been some contamination, no matter how you look at it. Whether it's been in the gym, whether it's been in the cafeteria, whether it's in your classroom, I'm sure there is some exposure. You know, like I said, I'm not sure I can go backwards and try to say this happened, this didn't happen, but I can say from here on out, before we let you into the cafeteria, either these things that we're trying to do are going to work or not, and if they don't, you won't go in the cafeteria. We probably won't open the building, or who knows, maybe it's like you used to do when you were in pre-K, where you bring your food and you eat it in the classroom.
Also, you guys said you've learned that we had some in our school since May, and yet the majority of students and parents just found out. I know you said it in the school committees, but to be honest, not that many parents and kids watch it because we have, like, after-school activities and like that. Nicest way to say it.
Well, I think I know what you were going to say, and you didn't say it, but that's okay. You didn't hurt my feelings. You got to remember, when we started this, we weren't looking for PCBs. We were just doing our due diligence, which basically is a fancy way of saying we want to be safe, that we're not going to just go rip out these windows and throw them in the dumpster, and then the EPA comes down and says, hey, did you test that? Because by then, not only have you done something terribly wrong by regulation, but you also disturbed it. And by the act of ripping it off the wall and breaking it apart, you're sending it all over the place. So we started there. So what we knew in May simply was that it was in the caulk. That was it. We didn't know anything else. After that, we said, once we know it's in the caulk, then you start to move away from the caulk to look for where else it may be. The second test we did was just the material around the window. We found it there, so we went one step further. By now, we're into June. By the time you guys were I think it was 2 days before school closed, that's when we knew it was in the air. So, and again, we did go to school committee and we said, hey, it's in the air. Now we got to do different kind of testing. Now we have to consider not having the middle school as a green project. And yeah, you're right. I wish everybody looked at the school committee meetings, but I know they sometimes go long. To make it easier for people, if you want to participate in school committee meetings, we do have them here. They're usually every other Wednesday. But even when you can't come, the other thing we've been able to do, and I think the technology department, is like we're videotaping this. Once we're done, we take it and we break it into little segments and we pop it onto YouTube, and you have links on our website. That's why I keep pointing to the computer. So if you don't want to watch the whole thing, you can just look for that segment that has the information, and you can see it live, well, sort of live. It's like a couple of days, or we archive them. So you can get the information, and I know it's, forcing people to go get involved, but, it's the only way for me to do it. I mean, we also have it on cable, but I know everybody doesn't have cable. I don't have cable, so I save myself the pain of actually watching myself. But if you have cable, we have a channel where it goes straight out. In fact, right now, people are watching this out there. So you can do it live, you can do it on cable, go to somebody else's house that has cable, or you can go on the computer and check it out there.
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
How you doing? Eric Martins. I have a couple questions for you, Dr. Colley, and for your panel. I'm just curious with the PCBs, because I did work with PCBs for quite a few years, OSHA certified, working for Clean Harbors, which is another environmental company. We also worked with a lot of LSPs and the DEM in Massachusetts, so I wish someone from the DEM was here also.
Can you spell the soup for me, because I have no idea who you're talking about.
I'm sorry?
Who is DEM?
Department of Environmental Management.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't know the
So,
initials.
every time we had PCB contamination, mercury, any hazard around a school, our requirements were 0 parts per million. That's why I'm curious about the EPA's threshold that they created, because when it came to anything within the state of Massachusetts with a school district, it was put at 0 parts per million, not 300, 400, anything like that. Another question is with the testing of the schools, if you're going into other cities, Fall River, New Bedford, they might be older schools like that. You said you weren't sure about testing, but I believe it was the EPA that mandates any schools built before 1977 have to be tested for PCBs. That's actually on your website if you want to look it up. Also, a lot of that came out because of Staten Island, New York, a lot of lawsuits going on over PCBs and exposure to that because it is carcinogen and it is a known cancer-causing agent. There is not just, well, there's possible testing on animals and things like that. It is known to cause cancer in humans. Also, you are concerned about money for the cleanup and stuff. I know with an environmental company, they're going to be getting prevailing wage rate pay. But the House Bill 3021, RFS, that was passed in 2007, 2008 by Congress. I believe it was Senator Thomas brought that because of the PCBs in schools, where the federal government actually grants all the money allocated for any kind of PCB cleanup, mercury, any contaminants in schools is paid for by the federal government. So if you want to research that, you can get on the internet and find your funding for that also. But I am curious with the EPA here, how you created your thresholds for certain levels it's okay to be around, certain levels it's not. I mean, for 20 years we've been taking all PCB oils out of all transformers, things like that, because they are bad. It could be coming from your caulking, could be coming from floor tiles, ceiling tiles, you don't know. Encapsulation, I've never heard of that for PCBs. It was always extraction. We would sit there with a Cusco or Vactor machine, take the soil out, if we had to remove concrete from foundations, you did that, because with the safety of, like, my son going into 5th grade, so he is going to go into the middle school, I do not feel comfortable exposing to him to your 180 days at 6.5 hours per day to be an exposure limit or something. It was always done by parts per million. If you're exposed to it, you're exposed to it. It doesn't matter how long it gets in your system, and it does and is known to cause cancer. So I'm just curious how you created...
Can we take some of those questions and start answering them, because they're getting long?
I'll start with the first one. PCBs are regulated under TSCA 40 CFR 761, and if you Google that, you'll find out the 1 part per million and 50 parts per million are part of that regulation. EPA has a primacy when it comes to PCBs over any state regulation. So that's where, we didn't make those numbers up, that's where they come from, 40 CFR 761. That was one question. You had several others.
The other piece was, it's a known carcinogen in humans.
Yeah, I think if you look under either IRIS or HEAST, which are the toxicology databases, you'll find that it's a class B2 carcinogen. And by definition, a class B2 carcinogen is that there's no definitive human studies that indicate that it is a carcinogen, and that the likelihood or the probability that it may be a carcinogen comes directly from animal studies. HEAST and IRIS.
So you're saying that you're telling me that you have no related studies of cancer being formed from PCB exposure in humans, is what you're saying?
Not me, EPA.
Well, you're speaking for the EPA, correct?
No.
Okay, who?
Just telling you where we get that information from.
Okay.
So.
Can I add something about, you mentioned the New York situation, and that's something that hasn't been brought up. I'm personally involved in some of the remediation that's going on down in the New York school systems. They did have a civil suit filed against them as a result of...
There's actually 9 of them.
There's quite a few that were filed, and they were filed as a result of a lack of, I guess, urgency on the school's part, on the actual administration's part for all of New York. They did nothing. Mm-hmm. And they sat back and they waited, and the civil suits came across, and then the EPA got involved, and the EPA said, you know what, not only are you going to have the civil suits, but we're also going to file a consent order that you have to immediately get going at doing something to rectify the situation. This was after they identified that there was a problem in the schools.
But did the EPA pay for it?
No, the EPA did not pay for it. And then what happened is New York continued to sit back, did nothing, and finally it went up into more of a political realm, and they're now moving forward and trying to figure out how they're going to structure their budget to move through all of the 700 schools that have problems at them. I would say this. I've been very impressed, from going down to New York, to Boston, to UMass, and the likes of the response actions that you've put forward, and specifically the team, and I think the direction that this is moving in, and the fact that you've identified the issue and you're trying to figure out a way in order to deal with it, because there are a lot of other schools and administrations in towns that have done the ostrich effect, have buried their head in the sand and pretended that this isn't a problem. And I commend the fact that I think that you're dealing with this in a mature way. So I hope that kind of answers that question.
Well, that was my concern, is the long-term effects. If we're going to put a Band-Aid on this by encapsulating it, something like that, and over the years it leaks PCBs again and someone does get infected, how is the school and the town going to react to that at that time?
I think you're jumping to the conclusion that we're